Hey, Taylor Ellwood here. Taylor Ellwood here, and welcome to Magical Experiments podcast. I'm about to have my guest Frater Barrabbas join me, and I've known Frater Barrabbas for a long time. He's written a number of amazing books, and he is one of the foremost magicians that I've seen out there in terms of just the work that he's doing. So I'm really excited to have him here today. And if you really enjoy this podcast, what I would really appreciate that you could do is give it a like, share it with other people, because when you do that, it helps us reach more people. And, I really appreciate that when that happens, and it allows me to bring more quality guests like Frater Barrabbas on. All right, I'm going to be right back, and I'm going to bring Frater Barrabbas on. Taylor Ellwood here with Magical Experiments Podcast, and I am super excited because today I have one of my favorite authors and magicians and really good friend, Frater Barrabbas. It's been a while since I've had you on the show, been a while since we talked. Welcome back and introduce yourself and tell us where we can find you and who you are.
Um, okay, well, my pen name is Frater Barrabbas, which is short for Frater Barrabbas Tiresius. It's a name that I've carried since I was a teenager because I was a teenage witch. You know, all of the myths and stories and legends that go with that kind of I would say storyline. But yeah, I mean, and I've been practicing forms of ritual magic based on witchcraft since I was a teenager. So we're talking about 1971, 1972. In 1972, I actually hitchhiked to Salem, Massachusetts, looking for witches, and of course, didn't find any. Just found a lot of, witches museum and a lot of other tourist trappy sort of stuff. This was before Salem became like a big deal as it is now. So that was a long time ago. But yeah, so all during that time period, in the early 70s and everything, there just really wasn't a lot of books. There was some pulpy books and some other junk that was available. There was a lot of plagiarization going on. People, with assumed pen names, and they would rip off stuff from Aleister Crowley and publish it as their own and stuff like that. It was just amazing how much of that junk was out there. And of course, you had to filter through all of that in order to find any real gems or any real goodies that you could possibly work with. And of course, grimoires were really rare. Books like The Golden Dawn were incredibly expensive. So basically, you ended up using your imagination and any bits and pieces of folklore, what you would call pop magic. I mean, comic books, all of that kind of stuff fed into this sausage grinder, and from which I was able to produce my own system of magic. Of course, I had help with Lady Shiva's Book of Shadows, and um, but another book that was called Mastering Witchcraft by Paul Hewson. And that book really was probably one of the most important books in that period for me. And I bought it and brand new, and I still have a copy of it today that somebody gifted me some years ago because none of this stuff stuck around in my library for very long because I was doing a lot of moving after I got out of college. So, over the many years, through experimentation and through creativity and imagination, I was able to put together my own system of ritual magic.
Well,
And
this brings me to my first question.
sure,
I had somebody recently ask me, he's like, that Frater Barrabbas guy, what kind of magic does he do? Does he do ceremonial magic or ritual magic? And I said he does ritual magic. And he's like, could you explain that to me? And I said, no, I don't have time to do that. But right now, here I have the genuine article. So could you tell us the difference between ceremonial and ritual magic? I know the answer, but I want you to share it for
well,
my viewers.
it's kind of, I don't know what you'd call it. It's no one does just one thing, first
Right.
of all. everything that we do is generally a mixture. Even if we're trying to reconstruct a grimoire kind of magical workings, we're going to end up having to fill in gaps with our imagination and all that because we cannot recreate the time period in which these books existed. You know, and there was an entire culture that in which these books came out of, and but anyway, the magicians of the Renaissance typically were, well, if we go back just a little bit further to the late Middle Ages, what you have are clerics who are working with angel magic. And some of the very first grimoires started to come out at that time. Um, and these people were, basically looking to do positive and good things as well as to spiritually enrich themselves. And but what they were doing required them to have uh, some kind of ecclesiastical authority in order for them to be able to do that. They had to basically borrow this power from God in order to practice this magic and not be, an apostate or completely breaking their connection with their God. The Jewish magicians were not quite as guilty of that sort of thing because there were less prescriptions against magic in what they did. Islam, it really depended on the location. So both in Judaism and Islam, all during the Middle Ages and into the Renaissance, they were doing an awful lot of magic, and the Solomonic system was very much a part of what it is that they were doing. And of course, this became a thing in the European magical traditions as well. But here's the deal. You know, if you are a ceremonial magician of the classical definition of what that is, and there's nobody around today who really fits that definition, although there are some people who beat their chest and try, basically, you are acting as and borrowing the powers and authorities of the deity in order to rule and conjure and order and direct spirits to do things. And oftentimes you will have to have some kind of intermediary, a familiar spirit, in order to do that kind of work. And that would generally be your holy guardian angel. So you'd have to go through a process to achieve a very high spiritual attendant or in order for you to have any kind of power at all, because Western philosophy believed that human beings were essentially powerless. The whole concept of human beings having energy or power, that's an Eastern philosophical, metaphysical belief that came to us in the late 19th century. I believe that the philosophers of antiquity believed that and practiced that as well, but those practices were lost because of the church. So someone who's a ceremonial magician has a grimoire that he or she, but usually it's a he, follows exactly as it's written and has to go through a period of purification and expiation and renouncing, admitting all their sins and purifying themselves so that they can at least um, uh, become a facilitator of godly powers.
Sounds exhausting.
Right. And if you make a mistake,
Oh,
you
you're
have to
screwed. You got to go all the
you
way
have to
back to the
start
beginning.
all over again.
You got to go all the way back to the beginning. You're totally screwed. You're host.
And and there are Solomonic magicians who believe that today. That if
I
that
know.
if
I know.
you screw up a ritual, then you need to do a bunch of banishing, a la Golden Dawn, and then come back another time and do it. In fact, Lazinski's book on goetic demonic magic has that you actually have to wait a few months before you start again.
I know that guy. I've read his books, and I'm just kind of like, there are so many holes in that. Like no, I'm like, no, I would not do magic that way at all. That just
Right.
sounds so disempowering.
Yes. But, not only that, but okay, so either you've got, you know, God helping you through your prayers and being pious and all this kind of stuff, then how can you direct demons to enchant your neighbor's wife so that you can, mess around with her? Maybe finding buried gold might be sort of without a lot of ethical concerns, but there's an awful lot of other powers and abilities that the goetic demons have, which are almost completely against any kind of pious life. So you're walking this tightrope in order to be able to function as an advocate of God. Now, so there's that kind of magic. Then there's chaos magic, which basically says, well, it's all a bunch of baloney anyways, and you can do whatever you want to do, and it's all tied up in language and linguistics, and traditions are basically to be pilfered and utilized in whatever fashion you want, including fiction. So then there's that aspect. Then there's the thalamic perspective, which is, if you are basically empowered in your will and you will things out into the world, then by golly, the world will comply to your willful desires that are being projected outward.
Sounds like
Now,
Dr. Doom.
well, but you'd be surprised. I mean, how many young magicians out there, that's what, I will this to be,
Oh no, I totally get it. I see it all the time. I mean, I just don't, it's not something I subscribe to.
then
You know.
then there's ritual magic. Ritual magic, a better name for ritual magic would be theurgy.
Hmm.
And okay, the question is, okay, what exactly is theurgy? And theurgy basically is that if you expect to perform all of these amazing things, that you have within you a deity, that you've managed to bring out that deity and assume it. And as you go through this process of assuming deity over a long period of time, years, you and that deity, there becomes less and less and less difference between you and that deity. And the thing is that uh, pagan polytheism believes that there is not much in the way of any barriers between us and the deities, and that as non-Christian pagan practitioners of magic, we have the right to essentially engage with the deities and even assume them, although we assume them not in an egotistical sort of fashion, actually just the opposite. Through humility, we understand the exaltedness of deity, but we engage in that and work with that, so that when you're doing magic with the deity assumed into your being, then you are basically able to do magic extemporaneously. And that means if you've got a script, and all of a sudden you have an impulse not to follow that script, then you don't need to follow that script because you are the deity in that magic circle, which is an emblem or a symbolic attribute of the world, and your sacred space. You can basically do a ritual and change it on the fly, and it's okay, because the deity is within you and makes it so. There's no external process or external factor that would indicate that, oh yeah, you really you messed up this ritual. It's like, no, you created something new. And so the mindset of a theurgist or a ritual magician compared to the mindset of someone who's practicing grimoire magic a la Renaissance um, is pretty stark. And this is why, a lot of people who are based in a Solomonic system of magic discuss and talk about the need for piety and approaching what I would say a contemporary religion such as Catholicism, um, as as a the kind of thing that you would want to do with your magic, so that you have founded it on a religious practice that is, steeped in time, and and has a precedence established with it. The thing that a lot of people don't seem to understand is that, if you are connecting to yourself directly to the deity, you don't need any of that. You are the religion. You're the priest or priestess. Um, you are the congregation, and the deities are out there, and therefore ritual becomes a play that you put on as a performer, assuming the persona of a deity for the audience of the cosmos. And that's completely different. And what I have found over the many years of working magic is that I never got into will-based magic. It was always at the behest of the deities that I'm connected to and that I give honor to and love to. They've always been a part of what it is that I'm doing, most specifically the goddess, whose various names to me, of course, I would not divulge because that's nobody else's business. But, you know, that's the one thing. And the amazing thing is that by doing the magic in that guise, the amount of success that you can achieve is strikingly amazing. Um, Basically, I've I'm almost 70 years old. Um, I'm not rich. I'm not, Elon Musk or something like that, but I'm comfortably well off. There always appears to be something that comes to the fore that allows to bring in more resources, so that, so the next stage of my life can happen. And it's part of the process. And
Hmm.
I've never felt at any point in my life where that has sort of, eluded me, or somehow is not happening. That process is always there, always guiding me, always working with me, always helping me to achieve my end. I may not always get what I want, but I most certainly get what I deserve.
Yeah. And or what you need, right?
Right.
That kind of brings back that Rolling Stone songs. You don't always get what you want, but you do. But I get what you get what you need.
But more than that, you don't really have the opportunity to get unearned, wealth and fortune.
No, that's true. I think that's absolutely true. There's a
Well,
lot of.
but the whole goofy idea of magic somehow is that you can get something for nothing. And they're just that's just there. Well, I can't find myself a lover, so I'm going to work magic and make it happen. It's like, what? You
Well,
know,
you know what I found with that kind of situation is that usually you end up biting off a lot more than you can chew because you're not because not putting aside the question of consent, which in and of itself is a pretty significant one. If you're not ready for somebody in your life, then you'll usually what you'll end up getting is just a whole lot of mess, and then you'll be right back to where you were. So.
yeah.
There's a lot of significant truth that you need to work on yourself. This kind of goes back because I had a recent episode where I said there are no shortcuts in magic or life because I'd had someone contact me and they're like, I want you to do a ritual so that I can control the weather, summon the dead, do all this other stuff. And I said, no, like you're gonna have to work at it. You're gonna have to put some time in. Like that's stuff you can do, but it takes a lot of work. And some of those things maybe you shouldn't even be doing. Like I don't think we really need to be messing with the weather, for example. I think humanity's done quite a great job of that as is.
Well, look
So
what
it's
happened to Bartholomew Cubbins, his king in the Oobleck.
yeah.
Oobleck is the stuff we'll try to make come falling from the sky. Dr. Seuss always has some really great stuff. I mean, uh, Bartholomew Cubbins and the Oobleck would make a really good magical ritual, I think.
There you go.
Except we wouldn't want to have Oobleck, coming instead of rain or snow. But I get emails from people. Like, there was this one guy who emailed me, and I had this dialogue with him, and he was just adamant that he wanted me to show him the miraculous. And I'm going like, okay. And he pointed out various miracles that happen around the world, like, the manifestation of Our Lady of Guadalupe, who exudes blood, and this kind of stuff. He basically believed that this was the phenomena magic that he was interested in, and he wanted to know if I could do that for him, or if I could tell him how that works. And I looked at him, and well, I didn't look at him, but I wrote to him and said, that's not really the kind of magic that I have been exposed to. And I've been exposed to an awful lot of magic in my years. I've seen some pretty amazing things. I've seen things that are practically impossible occur. I've never seen anybody fly off the ground. I've never seen but I've seen, some very peculiar things, but it was under a very specific context. And that context locked in is what made that phenomena occur. Now, was it being videotaped?
Probably not.
Sorry, I
No
have a
worries.
cat
Yeah,
that
hey, I
wants
get it. I got
attention.
cats too.
But anyway, so I mean, he basically felt that I I couldn't deliver the goods. That was his opinion. So I sent him. I gave him Jason Miller's email address, and I said, "Go talk to him." Oh, probably one of the reasons why he doesn't particularly like me, but I thought, hey, I told him that, if somebody's really going to show you this, it's going to probably cost you some money. Um, because he wanted this stuff. He was willing to pay money, and I was like, no, I
Well,
don't
yeah,
have.
yeah, you could send them on to somebody else if that in that case. Yeah, no, I get it. I always think it's interesting because people will want some stuff, and like you said, I mean, under the right circumstances, you can pull off some really amazing things, but at the same time, it's the right circumstances, and
It's the context.
it's the
And the question
context.
is, did it really happen? Could you put it into a lab and test it? And chances are probably not. Doesn't matter because it's our conscious perception. I've experienced things like extreme time dilation, where, my friends and I did a ritual and all that, and we basically experienced it, and we believed that it had taken hours to do, and we got out of it because I don't usually have a clock in my temple. Um, got out of the ritual, and like a little over an hour had passed, and I couldn't believe it. And when I went back and looked at the ritual steps and all we did, there was no way that it could have been done in an hour. Absolutely none. Um, it was basically about a 2-hour ritual, and we didn't race through it. So, I've just had all sorts of really peculiar things happen like that. But my magic is not focused on producing phenomena or producing, supernatural occurrences. That doesn't concern me. What concerns me more than anything else is meaning, significance. What is
Mm.
the meaning of life? What is my purpose and function in life at this particular point in time? And that brings me to all the books that I'm writing. And I'm not getting any younger, you know. Um,
Ah, you could have fooled me. I mean, I swear you looked younger than the last time I saw you.
I don't feel it. I'll be 70 in January, and you know, at around this time in your life you will probably be the most productive, especially if you're a Capricorn such as I am. Capricorns, flower very late in life. If um, And so that's what I'm doing. But the books that I'm producing, none of it is new material.
Hmm.
All of it goes back to, well, the book I just got through finished, Liber Artis Archaeomancy, which is basically an entire book on angel magic, as well as a second part of that book is based upon, the transdimensional vortex structures of the 18 dimensions of the Kabbalah, which we can get it deeper into that if you want. But all of that stuff was written back in the 90s. Liber Nephilim, um, all the rituals and everything from that was the early 90s.
Hmm.
Um, the book, uh, the book Abramelin Lunar Ordeal. Um, I, I Let me see. When did I meet you? I think I met. I think I got in touch with you in late 2006, early
Yeah,
2007.
that was about the time. Yeah.
So that was just before I began doing those workings. I don't know if I talked about them at all.
I don't think you did at the time, but I mean, sometimes that's the case. I mean, I think it's interesting because you and I are both prolific writers. I mean, I've watched you putting out stuff lately, and I appreciate exactly what you're saying because I've had some people say like, where, like all of a sudden you put out all these books, where did all that come from? And it's like it literally came from all the years beforehand where I was working on this stuff, and then it was the right time for it to take form and put
Yep.
it out there. It wasn't like it just got whipped out. And that, it's kind of the same thing with some of the projects that I'm working on right now, where it's like, yeah, we're getting to that point where there will probably be some more flurries of activity, but sometimes you also have to take some time away to just do the work.
Well, I didn't know how to write this stuff into books. I mean, the very first book that I wrote was The Pyramid of Powers, which was never, ever published. um, Marm and Disciples Guide for Ritual Magic, they're both being republished.
Congratulations.
There's a new copy of Disciples Guide that is out there now. And in December, Mastering the Art of Ritual Magic will be out as well. But you know, and Llewellyn just contacted me today and told me that the Magical Kabbalah for Beginners, one of the poorest titled books I've ever ever marketed, but it was my first book with Llewellyn exactly 12 years ago is when I, put that thing to bed. And so in 2012, in autumn, that's when it was going through final production phase. And of course, then it appeared a few months into 2013. But at any rate, so I mean, it's I'm gonna take the book back, and Blake Malloway is like, oh, we want to publish it. We don't have any books in the Kabbalah at all. Zip, nothing in their catalog. So I'll probably add maybe a few more chapters to it. Maybe something about the Enochian Kabbalah I'll put in there. Um, and you know, then I'll basically put that back into print, and it will have a completely different title than Magical Kabbalah for Beginners. It was because the for beginners motif was what they were
Popular
doing.
back then, right? Well, yeah,
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 for
yeah.
beginners, but it really wasn't. And there were some people who panned it because of that. They said, this book isn't for beginners. Ah. It's like, well, yes, it's not Kabbalah for dummies. But if you ever I actually looked and read Kabbalah for Dummies, and it was pretty sparse. This actually had meat in it. It gave you the complete system of the Kabbalah, and then it also gave you a lot of rituals, meditation systems, and all that kind of stuff that went with it to make it alive, so that the attributes of the Kabbalah could be something that you could personally experience. Because just having a bunch of dry theory, I felt was not the way to really present the Kabbalah. And there's a number of people who've really thought very highly of the book. I mean, they sold probably, I think, 6,500 copies. So it isn't too bad, but they didn't want to print anymore because it wasn't selling that much. Of course, they weren't marketing it either.
Well,
Once,
we know the whole book marketing game. I mean, you and I both do because we've
well,
been out there and
only
doing it.
they only market a book for 6 months, and that's it.
Yeah, well, that's not long in the grand scheme of things. So
Well, no, because their idea is the next new thing, you
yeah,
know,
well, I mean,
cookbook for witches. That everybody wants a cookbook for witches, so
for six
let's put that
months,
out.
and then after that, it's on to the next thing.
Oh, but that's the way they are. They're in the business of selling books that are popular, that are, but and there are some authors out there who have catered to this and actually have done, a reasonably good job. Um, it's kind of curious about how all of that works out, but there are some authors out there, I'm not going to name any names, who've written, like there's somebody who's written a book, a series on basic witchcraft. I think the latest one they had was the Psychic Tarot, and then there's the Psychic Witch. And I mean, the thing is that these are like coffee table books to me. You look at them and they are beautiful. I mean, graphically, they are really rich. They feel good in your hands when you're paging through them and all that. But the author of that book is an advanced occultist, but he's in the business of selling books and he's living off of it. And he has sold, was it tens of thousands of these books, and it continues to sell. He's the biggest author that Llewellyn has. And, you know, and of course he has the image of, being the witch, sorcerer, magician, and all that. And so that, he's perfectly coiffed, as it were, um, and has lots of fans, so many fans that you can't really get a chance to even sit down and talk to him. But it doesn't really matter because I'm in my last few decades of life and I'm basically writing up all these books. And these other folks, they'll just basically get people turned on to the subject, and maybe at some point they'll buy one of my books.
Well, I mean, you do have a following, I will say. So I definitely think that that's the case. So
I'm
let's
shocked by it.
well, you know what? Enjoy it. Enjoy it while you got it. That's what I always say, you know? I
I
mean,
I don't hear about it much.
well, I just happen to know I just happen to know because I occasionally do hear things and it's all good, but I mean, I think that what I've always appreciated about your work is that you don't cater to the masses, that you have that you're writing for the sake of putting out really good content that is real and relational and that people can connect with if they're willing to do the work, but they have to be willing to do the work, and that's the thing that has always stood out about your work to me. And I mean, I can appreciate that because I have a similar approach with my own magical work. I'm not writing this to cater to everybody. I'm writing this to the people who want to do the work.
um, which is why, I've not only are you willing and interested in doing the work, you're interested, you allow yourself to create. And and that means that you can engage your imagination. And for some reason, this is something that is not allowed in the practice of magic. I mean, I've had people, really accost me for breaking traditions. How dare you, write a ritual working? Uh, I imagine the fallout I'm going to get when the in February when the Abramelin lunar deal comes out. I mean, there's people who are really going to take me to task for that because I'm basically saying there's a lot of different ways you can do the same thing, and you don't have to rigidly follow these traditions that were basically part and parcel to an age that is no longer here. Um, create, go out and experiment, try stuff, if that means that you end up picking up Simon's Necronomicon and geeking around with that for a little while, you'll get tired of it after a while, and you'll go on to something else. It's
Well, genuine innovation and evolution in magic comes about, or with any discipline really, comes about because you're willing to defy the norm and express your own take on something. And
but
not everyone's going to agree with you, and that's all right. The question is again, are they going to actually do the work? I mean, anybody can open their mouth and say, I don't agree with what you're doing. Well, that's great, but have you actually done the work? Where's the receipts?
where's the beef?
All right, where's the beef? Right.
Um, um, yeah, but for some reason, I mean, you and I are not defying any precedents at all. In magic, there is no precedence. There is, you can respect traditions or you don't have to. Chaos magic really showed, the Western occultism that all these rules that they were following were just basically a bunch of baloney. I mean, really. Um, I've never felt like I'm defying something. I feel like I'm following my own muse. I'm
Well,
following my creative impulse.
that's a huge part of what magic really ought to be about. I
It
mean, magic is a
ought to be.
highly personalized, in my opinion. I mean, that's how I've approached it. Even like with a lot of what I've appreciated about your work is that you've written about in a similar way where it's kind of like, okay, here's what I've done, and you can do that, but you can also you can approach it these other ways and make it your own, and that's really the whole point, is to make magic your own. So it's interesting to me, because I think that what I really value about your work and the books that I've read is how it's given me a perspective to your way of thinking, and at the same time how I can look at it and say, okay, this is what I agree with, maybe this is what I don't agree with, and that's cool, but I'm going to try these things out and see what comes of it. And that's really the whole point. We don't have to have it doesn't have to be letter perfect and everything else. But I think that sometimes people get this stuck on this idea of magic having to be done a certain way in order to quote unquote get results or whatever else. And don't get me wrong, I mean, I sell classes on results based magic, but even that is still based around the idea of here's the ideas, now make it your own. Go out there and make it your own, and go get the results that you want. And if you want someone to give you an opinion about it or whatever, I'm more than happy to do that, because I can usually take apart anyone's magical working and say, okay, here's what worked and here's what probably didn't work and here's why. But that's its own thing.
Well, it really boils down to the fact that in my opinion, and this is just my opinion, mind you, there there's a difference between what I consider to be a true magician and someone who's still, I don't know what you'd call it, is still trying to learn to be a true magician. And the real difference between them is that the true magician has built their own magical system. And it may have absolutely no meaning to anybody else but them. And that's okay, as long as it works, as long as it gets results. The other thing is that the idea that magic somehow works in a vacuum and that you can work a magical spell or a series of spells and then sit back and wait for your desires to manifest is pure hogwash. Magic is more subtle than that, and it really truly requires an individual to do the legwork and the mundane steps along with the magic to ensure that you have the ability to bend probabilities to in the direction that you want them to.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that's that's the thing that really blows my mind. Number one, I'm using this book It's like, wait, you're using a book. Did you take the book and pull the rituals out of it and write them down in your own notebooks and all of that, and then start looking at them and playing around with them and practicing some bits of them and maybe trying to combine some bits of with that and experiment? No, I have this book that I am following, and the moment they say that to me, you know, I stop listening to them sort of because it's like, well, okay, you're following this book. Someday when you are tired of following that book and you want to actually work real magic, then then we can talk. But that means you're going to have to, you're going to have to fill your notebook up with notes and with ideas and all kinds of stuff. I mean, the great artists all had their notebooks in which they scribbled things down. Einstein, Leonardo da Vinci, all these people had all these notebooks in which they scribbled things down and all of that, and experimented with stuff, and later on produced something um, from all of that work. And we as magicians have to do the same thing. I may publish a book, but I expect people to take the rituals out of that book and tear them apart and look at them and find things in those rituals that they like, and oh, this is really cool, and then other things like, what the hell is this and what does this mean? And I think it should say this. I've got one student in my entire life who actually did this and created his own system of magic. Out of all the people that I've worked with, talked to, practiced magic with, and all of that, he's the only person who did that. And I visited him with him. They had a small mini festival down in Tallahassee. His name is Eric Brown. Um, and Eric Brown took all the materials that I have and built his own magical system from it. Plus, he also took some stuff from the Golden Dawn that he felt was important too, and pulled all of this together to create his own system of magic. And to go down to Tallahassee and to see a group of people practicing magic that has as its foundation the stuff that I produced was was sort of amazing. I mean, probably the most amazing thing I think I've seen in a very long time. But out of the hundreds of people that I've worked with and who have been students, all that kind of stuff, one person managed to pull it together.
Well, I mean, that's I think that speaks to that person's perseverance. But again, it also illustrates that, I mean, this isn't a path for the faint-hearted. You know, magical work in general isn't a path for the faint-hearted. There's a certain level of I'll put it this way. I've said this to some people. I've said, um, I've said, when you're doing magical work, at some point you end up going mad. And I said, I may not look it, but I'm quite mad sometimes. I've been quite mad. And they're kind of like, oh, they don't know how to really take that. But it's quite true. I mean, I know, because it's like you have to be willing to step outside of conventional reality and normal modes of being and thought and all that other stuff in order to discover what your limits are and to discover how to surpass those and everything else. And this isn't will-based magic, incidentally. This is just more that you have to be willing to step outside of the conventional box. So it's interesting because that means a certain level of bravery, but also a certain willingness to be like, I'm willing to test my own preconceived notions of reality to
Hmm.
discover what reality really could be for me.
Um, I have a question that I've been wanting to ask you for a while now.
Oh boy, all right. I get to get interviewed now. Ask away.
Taylor, who is your God? You don't have to tell me any names, but do you have a deity or deities that you work with and that you give offerings to, and uh, that you deal with as if you were the priest and intermediary of your personal religious cult?
Hmm.
Do you do that? Is that part of your practice?
Well, I can answer that question. Yeah. One of them is actually sitting on the bookshelf right behind me.
Whoa.
Eros.
yes, I see. We don't need to name any names,
I
but
don't mind. Well, I don't mind naming a couple of them. There's one I won't name because that one's highly personal, and
right.
that one is my own personal. But like I do a lot of work right now with I've been doing a lot of work with Eros and Aphrodite lately. And it's
Mm.
interesting because here's the story about this. So in the end of August, I left my day job and I was going to go to graduate school for a degree in counseling. And I went to
I,
I got out of the job. I got out of the job and I was just exhausted. It's been a crazy year for me. I broke up with my girlfriend. I left this very stressful job and I'm getting ready to go to graduate school. And I go out to the ocean and I take these two arrows and the statues of Eros and Aphrodite and this ring that my ex had left for me. And I do this ritual calling them in and this was a new moon ritual that I did during the day. Because why not? Hey, it doesn't matter what time of the day it is, the moon's still there somewhere. And and so they're like, okay, Taylor, so what do you really want to do? Like, why are you here? What do you want? And I said, well, I want to serve the magical community. That's one of my missions and purposes. And I plant an arrow into the ground. And then I plant another arrow into the ground and I said, and I want to do the men's work. I want to serve the men's community because there's, men are hurting in the world. And if we want to make the world a safer place, we got to first teach them how to be safer for themselves so then they're safer for other people. And they're like, okay. And then they're like, so you realize that, whatever you might think will be happening, it's really not that there's going to be some changes. And within a few days, I had decided to leave graduate school, dropped out, thankfully before I started. And here I am on my own self-employed journey. There takes a certain level of divine madness to get you there. You know what I mean? So, I mean, that's a perfect illustration of like, okay, you work magic, and yes, changes will come into your life, and you have to kind of be willing to go with it. And if you're willing to go
Well,
with it, then
is it madness or is it genius? Because in antiquity, they would have called that genius.
hmm
Genius is the inspiration of deity to humanity. It takes a person out of themselves, which is what ecstasy or ecstasis means. It means out of stillness or out of routine. And, you know, for me, the deities are preeminently important and are a part of my magical existence in life. And I like what you're telling me about, your connection with deity and all that because I've run into people who practice magic who really don't have any concept of this whatsoever. I mean, they're either Solomonic ceremonial magicians who are basically going to mass, and confession and church and all that kind of stuff. Um, and that's kind of their religious spiritual foundation. And then, you've got other people who are practicing magic and who are practically atheistic,
well,
or who believe that their ego is God, and that through that empowered ego that they will be able to achieve all that they need to achieve. And they point to Aleister Crowley and say, well, Aleister Crowley kind of set this path up and all that.
and look how well that worked for him.
Well, anyone who is a pioneer, literally someone who's burning a path, you can't really judge them because, like Gerald B. Gardner, for instance, Gerald or Alex Sanders, even a better example. People who personally knew Alex Sanders. Alex Sanders had one huge flaw. He didn't want to work for a living.
hmm
And so he and Maxine would go to this large farmers market in the local community where they lived in London. After it closed, picking up all of the discarded vegetables and other stuff, and they would bring that home for their dinner. Um, you know, Maxine basically said that they lived from month to month, not knowing if they would have the money for the rent and for other stuff. And this is a guy who had rock stars coming to visit him at the pub where he would hang out. Um, but the king of the witches did not like to have any kind of regular job. And so he was reliant on other people basically providing for his means. And you know, I could not imagine being that way.
Me either. Here's the thing about my approach to spirit work, since we're kind of talking about this. I'm actually working on my latest book, Walking with Demonic Spirits, right now. I just started writing it. And one of the concepts I talk about in there is the concept of relational. It's interesting because recently, as you know, and some other people now know, I've been doing a lot of work around the men's work, which is just really the men's movement and stuff like that. And one of a really interesting fellow by the name of Dewey Freeman, who's a psychologist in this, talks about relationality in regards to this work. And, like the idea that with relationality, you have, a person wants to connect with another person. And it's like, am I okay? Am I okay when I connect with this person? Can I be okay? And I think that's a really interesting question to explore. Well, I think we can take that from a spiritual dimension and apply
Oh,
it the same
yes.
way to spirits. And so this is one of the topics that I talk about. So like when you asked that question, I thought it was interesting because it's like, well, yeah, I mean I have what I would consider to be a relational connection with spirits because it's all about the relationship and it's not about one extreme or the other.
It's not
Which
about abusive relationships.
No, it's not about
It,
coercion or anything along those lines. And so it's a very and it's the kind of the same way that I approach magic and religious people in general because you get a lot more out of collaboration than you do otherwise. Not that I didn't have my own, experiences at one time where I wasn't as good at that, but I've gotten a lot better at it over the years, and so there it goes. But I mean, with spirits, it's always been that way. From the very beginning, when I first started practicing magic, one of the rituals that I did, and I've written about in my book, Walking with Elemental Spirits, I did a ritual where I exchanged essence for essence, some of my blood for the elemental energies. And that was a relational work. It wasn't me trying to get control over them, it was me trying to form a closer connection with them.
yes, a link, a bond.
Yeah.
Um, well, the thing is that I've always I've always dealt with spirits through the mindset of a witch. And what that means is that um, demons are demigods. And I treat them as demigods. I treat all spirits as demigods. And I've never approached a spirit with this whole thing of, well, the deity is in me, and so you will do what I say, or I will torture you, or I curse you, or blah blah blah. Which is actually really a part of the Solomonic ceremonial magical system that my magic circle defines the difference between sacred, which is inside the circle, and profane, which is outside. If I invoke or evoke an entity or a spirit, it is within my sacred space. I'm exposed to that being completely. Um, so that relationship that you're talking about is critically important to kind of magic I have because I can't hide in my magic circle and have that demon appear in the triangle and all that. Or I can be a voyeur and look at it in my crystal or show stone. I mean,
Well,
but
and here's an interesting piece to this, and I'm kind of curious as to what your thoughts. But one of the points that I make is that what you bring to the relationship matters as much as what the spirit brings.
oh yes, and that spirit is very protean. So your expectations and your imagination is going to be fired by the influence of that spirit. And for that reason, people who don't have the ability to establish their own personal boundaries should not be really exposed to this kind of magic. because they could lose themselves very easily. One of the things that I feel that the men's movement really ought to do is to deal with what I think has become extremely prevalent today, and that's toxic masculinity.
Well, that's a
And
huge part of what it does deal with, actually. Yeah.
yes, well, it's really funny because of the fact that I've never been influenced by toxic masculinity. I have never coerced in my relationships with women. I've never coerced them. I've never tricked them. I've never given them, drugs or a Mickey to, so I could have my way with them. Um, and I've treated people around me with a certain amount of respect because of the fact that, if you're going to be obnoxious, someone's going to punch you in the nose at some point. And so, unless you like to feel pain and you enjoy fighting and that kind of stuff, and basically, wrecking stuff and being destructive, if that's part of your thing, that's great. But it was never part of my thing. I never had tantrums where I broke things as a kid because then I would regret having broken my toy or whatever, and that would make me even more unhappy. So, I mean, I kind of kept a
Well,
cap on that kind of nonsense. And when I became an adult, I continued to do so. The really interesting thing about toxic masculinity is that we now have these video screens that we can hide behind. And you can type out stuff and you can be just a jackass and just really, rage against people and just say the most foul things. But if you were in a bar and you did that, somebody would probably knock your teeth down your throat. I mean, the whole thing about callousness today is that we're allowed to be callous because we have this insulation of, distance and because most of the time we're communicating over, different types of electronic media. And it's allowed people to really show how ugly and hateful and disturbing that they can be. And it's almost like a badge of honor these days, you know.
well, here's what I'll say about the men's movement, because this isn't normally where I go with some of these, but I think it's interesting. Um, for me, what the men's movement has really shown me is the fact that as a man, I'm not alone. That there are other men who can relate to my experiences
Of
and
course.
and can relate to the challenges that I feel in being a man, and that as a result, and can relate to the pressures, the patriarchal pressures, the societal pressures, the ideas and notions as to what it means to be a man, and be able to actually deconstruct that and then to come into healthy relationship. Because if you look at patriarchal systems, it's actually in no one's interest from that kind of system for men to actually connect and be brothers with each other, because by doing that they become more empowered and embodied, and they become more relational. And when men become relational, that's when they discover their real strength, which is that ability to connect with each other and with other people from a place of safety and compassion. It deconstructs modern society. Modern society is built on keeping people isolated.
Yep, definitely. And within that isolation in electronic media, it allows you to also behave in a fashion that you normally wouldn't if you were in public.
Right.
Um,
And you can take that same thing and apply it to spirit work, because those models that we talked about, like the ceremonial and all that, it's based on the same principle of isolation, and it's based on the same principle of like a top-down approach, and it's based on control structures that are really that actually essentially serve to isolate the magician in a very real sense from the world around them. Because okay, if I put a magical circle around me and I have this demon over here and everything else, I'm only including what I want. I'm excluding everything else. Well, I can technically direct everything else, so to speak. But if I'm afraid of everything else, how far is that really going to get me?
well, a lot of your ceremonial magicians um, were afraid.
Yeah, I know because they were and look at the propaganda machine behind that, and it's like it's just kind of crazy.
Well, it's because of the innate morality and constructs associated with the culture and society that existed at that time. But the thing you can understand is that the Renaissance is not a time and place that we want to repeat today, because of the fact that out of the Renaissance European mindset became a lot of what we would consider to be the aggressive, militaristic colonialism that pretty much dominated the rest of the world for a few hundred years. And it has done an enormous amount of damage to the interrelationship between nations. But the thing is that the Republican Party mindset and Trump MAGAism and all of that has really turned things on its head. But it should be an object lesson to most of us who see all of that as a lot of errant nonsense that really doesn't accomplish anything at all. In fact, does an awful lot of destruction. That it's definitely something that we shouldn't be doing and a direction that we should not be going. And that you should just listen to your own inner self, um, and try to deal with your own fears and your own insecurities to ultimately discover that, yes, you are not alone, and that there is a brotherhood and there's a sisterhood and there's a humanityhood as well.
Oh
As
yes, there is. All of
And it
that is
goes
the
beyond
case.
that, because
Yes.
then we're also connected to everything, both animate and inanimate, in the entire world. That unity, that oneness, is essentially the goal of anyone who wants to truly work magic, is to achieve that goal so that they can consciously hold in their minds and their hearts that sense of connectedness with everything. That's
Mm.
the direction that magic truly, as an enlightened form of practice, should basically guide everyone.
I think that's a perfect note to end this on. Like that
Okay.
just that's like perfect. Like that's so such an excellent point to make. So
Oh,
so where can people find you on the web?
uh, well, the blog that you turned me on to and had me start writing to is still there. It's got over 500 articles in it. Some of them are quite lengthy. That's Frater Barrabbas blogspot.com. Um, my fraterbarabbas.com site is kind of out of date. I need to go out there and connect with it. Then there's also one for the ESSG that probably needs a little bit of work as well. Some of the links in it have gotten old and no longer direct you anywhere. But the best way to get in touch with me is to email me, connect with me through Facebook. Frater Barrabbas is, you can connect with Frater Barrabbas on Facebook and all of that. Or better than that, get one of my books, curl up in a chair and listen to what Grandpa Barabbas, has to say to you. I mean, because that's, people tell me that it's like having your magician grandfather or uncle, sit down and chat with you about all this stuff. I have that sort of, atmosphere going on in my writing.
Well, there you go. Perfect. I highly recommend that. Pick up some of Grandfather Barabbas's works.
Yeah.
Oh, all right, my friend. Well, I want to thank you for coming on to the show. It's so good to catch up with you again and to see just all the books that are coming out. I'm really happy for you and really
Yeah.
pleased that the work is coming out there.
Yeah. And like I said, I think the next book that you come out with, I think that you should get me a copy of it and have me read it and then have me write something up on it.
All right. Well, I
I,
can
I've done that
certainly,
with you.
yeah, I
So,
can certainly do that for you. I will.
so
Yeah.
at any rate, you take care, Taylor. Like I said, I think the world of you. You were my mentor. You gave me the ticket into the writing world for writing occult books on magic. I will forever be grateful for you for helping me do that.
Oh, thank you. All right, everyone, thank you for watching that show. And if you haven't yet checked out one of my books, go to magicalexperiments.com and go check out the Process of Magic series, where I will teach you how magic works, or the Space Time Magic series, or the How to Work with Spirits series. I've got lots of interesting books out there myself, and I'd love to share them with you. And again, if you've enjoyed this episode, go ahead and please like it, leave a comment. If you didn't like it, you can do that too, and I'll make a meme out of what you said. All right, thanks, and have a great day.